The question I get asked often is, how do I get better at programming, or how do I get better at web development? My personal take on this is to build projects, and an even better way is to build these projects and share them online and share the code online. But how do you do that? Well, there's two tools I'm going to be introducing and talking about today. The first is Git, and the second is GitHub. But what are these tools? What is Git and what is GitHub? The two things I mentioned was Git and GitHub. What are these? So Git is the best way I can describe it. It's a tool that allows you to track changes in your code. So for example, and it's going to make better sense when I dive into it and use examples, but if you were to make changes to your code and you want to go back and revert to those previous changes, or if you want to make a particular change in one thing, work on something else, switch to another thing, that's what Git is used for. GitHub, on the other hand, you can use Git as integration, but what GitHub is, it's basically a place to store your code or basically share your code online with others, and others can work on it collaboratively. And like I said, it'll make more sense when I start working on the code base. So the example here is going to be very meta. This is basically a little file that just has instructions on what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to build it in front of you and show you how I'm going to use Git to make it easy to use and how I'm going to share it online. So I hope this really helps you out. Great, so I think before diving into the code, let's have a look at what a GitHub page looks like. This is my example here of my GitHub page. It has a little README, which you may not get in the beginning, but you can always set this up, a little README here. And if you go into repositories, these are all the kind of the different projects and code that I've been working on, and they're also unfinished as well. But this is an example where, let's go to my personal blog, for example. This is my blog here. It has all the code here, plus a README. So what we're going to be working on with this particular project that I want to demonstrate to you is basically we're going to be creating a README. We're not going to be working on the code, we're going to be creating a README. And one more tip I'd suggest people to set up is when you set up your code and when you try and do your pushes, which will make sense later on, when you want to do your pushing your code up to GitHub, is to set up SSH keys. So you can do that through settings, and I think it's down here. There's lots of methods on how to do that. So I recommend you head over to the appropriate tutorials. I'll probably link them down below on how to set up SSH keys, which is really useful, really helpful. You can do it through one pass. I think we do that for where I work. We do it through one pass, or you can store the SSH key somewhere on your machine, which will be plenty of tutorials online. So I don't want to go dive in too deep. I just want this video to be kind of inspiration for you. So let's dive into some actual code, shall we? Great, so we have our little project here. If I show you what's in here, it's basically just a README file, that's it. So we'll exit out of here. So if I exit out of here, you'll see that just a README file and ways to get back. So we want to commit this to a repository straight away. So how do we do that? We can obviously initiate Git. So if I go Git init, you're now going to see a little Git file which is used to track all the changes. So what I'll do is if we go to the README now, and let's add like a title. So we'll call it initialization. Great, now you'll see that if I do git, I think add, if I do git status, I think, you'll see that there's no commits here, but I've added this code here has been added to the repository. So I've got this tool called LazyGit, which I'll link in the description. This allows us to look at the changes here. So this is the type changes. This is what's going to be committed to the repository for those changes. So if I do git commit m, we'll just say init. Now I've committed that change to the repository. So if I do a git log, one line, I can type. You see that this is our first change here. If I do a git status, it should say, yep, there's nothing to commit. So it's all been put onto the working tree, the branch. So we want to push this to our repository. So if I do git push is usually what we do. You'll see that comes up with, we need to add the remote. So let's head over to the GitHub UI to do that. So here we are here, I hit this, we go new repository. And see it comes up with all this. So if I type in git guide, check the availability of the name, a simple guide to Git. And we'll make it public. We can add a README, but we're not going to do that. We're going to include that in here. Now you have the option of adding what we call a gitignore. Gitignore is really useful in a situation where you don't want to be, if you want to have your code that you don't want to add to the repository. So think about passwords, secrets. You want to keep those on your machine secretly. You don't want that to be committed to source code publicly for people to see. So that's what a gitignore will do. I'll leave that blank for now. And what I'll do is I'll create one when I'm doing my code. Now we've got this thing called a license. There are different types of licenses. I believe MIT is the most popular. So basically with a license, when you commit code and put it online, that code technically is yours. You hold the copyright to that code. No one can actually steal it or take it. So this is really important when you're looking at other people's code publicly. If there's no license, you actually can't use it. So it's really important to make sure there's a license there. If you have an MIT license, which I think you can read through, that means other people can use your code. I think not for profit, but I think it does, and correct me if I'm wrong, like for example, let's say you create a library that destroys things, you're not liable, I think. So that's kind of like what the MIT license is for. So we'll leave that, we'll include MIT license actually. Actually no, we'll leave that blank for now, just to make it a bit easier. What I tend to do is I tend to actually make, when I start a project, I make the repository online first, and then I pull that repository later rather than creating it on our system. That's what I tend to do, but we've done it backwards, which I think is going to be fine. So we're going to create this repository. And you're going to see it's all blank here. It even tells you what to do here. It gives you commands and how to set things up. And you'll see that this git at github.com, this is how you use SSH to add your GitHub, add stuff to GitHub. There's an HTTP method, which is a bit annoying because you got to give your username and password every single time. If you're using SSH, it uses SSH key stored in your system to verify if you're the actual person who's allowed to push these commits to the repository. So let's do that right now. Let's commit the code that we've been working on onto the repository. So we'll come over here and we're going to do git remote, add origin. You can see I've done this so many times. github.com, and we're going to go to Shivan, and we're going to call this git guide. So that's that there. We go git push, and we've got to set the upstream to origin main. So what origin is just the name of the repository that we're going to call on GitHub. That's the origin. This is remote. Remote is essentially what you're working on here. So what I've got on my computer is the remote, and what you got on the server is the origin. And we're going to be pushing to that. And we've got this thing called the main branch. So you've got different branches. So you can imagine we have our source code here. I take the source code, I can work on it, I can put multiple branches in there, I can push that code up to the repository. And let's say I've got another friend who works on that code, works on a different branch, he pushes his changes, I can pull those changes. So they'll make more sense when we start working on through some examples. So I'm going to push this code up. You can see it does things here. Let's come over to the web browser, so I'm going to swing this back. And if I do a refresh, you're going to see this all change. So basically there's nothing here. We do a refresh. And there we go. So this basically, we can view the code here. This has our little README file, and then this has the kind of the instructions that we've discussed here, which I think is really cool. So now I want to show you some really good examples of staging and committing code. So remember I was using things like git add, git commit. I kind of want to show that better in detail with this example here. So two things we're going to add is we're going to add a license and a gitignore. So I'm going to firstly add the gitignore. So we're going to do git, we're going to create gitignore, a gitignore. And we're just going to add a file called private md. So this is something we don't want to be committing to our source repository, as you remember. So let's just add that to, so if I do git status, so it's going to tell me that this hasn't been changed. It knows this has changed. If I go to lazy git, which is a tool that I have, you'll see that this hasn't been committed, so it knows that. And to add that, I can just do git add, I can do git add gitignore. Or I can always do git add dot, which is going to add everything in the directory that I'm in. This is my current directory. So if I git add, so add that there, go to git status, it'll tell me that this is staged and ready to be committed to the repository. If I do git commit, and I can write here, feat adding git ignore. And you see that with the syntax. This is actually known as conventional commit. It's basically a kind of a standard on how to set up code or set up your commits. So there's, I'll link this in the description. This is basically just a way to make your commits nice and easy to read. So for example, if you're adding a new feature, you add a feat tag here. And if you're adding a fix to your code, you'll do fix. So basically really simple like that. So we'll come back to our code here, and I'm going to commit this code. So I've committed the code here. If we do git log, one line, you'll see that now I've got, this is the initial commit that we made earlier, and this is the next commit here. We're adding that gitignore. What I can also do is I can add that license which we were talking about before. So if I go to license, MD, and I'm just going to copy and paste the license, the MIT license. So I can just Google that, and I can find an MIT license on Wikipedia, for example, and just copy that through. So I'm going to do that right now. Write that file, exit out of that, do a git status again. You'll see that license MD has not been committed. We can add that in, git license. I'll do it this way. And you'll see that if I do git status again, read to me committed to the code. We can commit that there. So git feat adding license .md. You'll see that if we go to the repository, I've just committed it to my remote branch, not the origin. So if we go back here, you'll see that if I refresh this, those files aren't there. It's just the README. If I go back to here, and I show you all the code here, you'll see that there's license and README. So we need to push those changes to the repository. Now, what I want to do is, if I go here, git log one line, you see that I've got these two commits here, which I think are pretty much the same thing. I can squash them together. So what I can do is I can do a git reset on this, and we can go back to 4ff. So if I type in 4ff, this will get rid of those two commits here. So if I click that here, to daisies, if I do 4, 3, there we go. So if I do git log again, I'll just clear the screen, the console. If I do git log one line, you see that I just had that commit there. And if I do a git status, it'll tell me that these two files haven't been committed to the code. So what I can do now is I can do a git add on this and git commit feat adding git ignore and license. And it's not fear, it's feat. So we'll just tick that there. And now I'm ready to add that to the repository on GitHub. Now the reason I've done this and show you this is, it seems a bit laborious, but the reason I've done that is when I'm writing code on the branch, sometimes I like to commit multiple times, but I don't want all those commits to come up onto the code that we're going to be having on here. So a really good practice is when you're coding is to write features and then you're going to refactor your code. And let's say you made a mistake and you want to go back to a previous feature or back to where you are without having to affect the code that's on GitHub. That's one way of doing it. We can reset, squash your commits together, and then push them back to the repository. So let's just do that now. So if we do a git push, you see that now it's been pushed to the repository. If we do a git log one line, you see that it's just one commit that we're adding, not those two commits before. And if we just do a refresh, so we'll come over to here, let me bring the code around here, and if we do a refresh, you'll see that now. If I view that, you'll see that there's the most recent commit. You'll see that there's the license. Now, I don't think I need the MD there, but there's a license there, and there's the README. And I'll just check, do I need to have that? I'll just do a quick little, so yeah, it knows the MIT license on there, which is fine. So another example is I want to show you what branching's like. So when you work with programming, you want to work on one particular feature. But let's say there's something you want to work on or switch to because there's an emergency you got to fix. And you don't want to have to, the code you're working on right now, the feature is half built, but you want to go back to your what the code is in production and you want to fix this particular feature. So that's where branching really helps. Or if you want to work on multiple things at the same time and you want to switch between the two, that's where branching can help without having to lose all your work. So let me show you an example of that. So let's go back to our README example here, and you'll see that here. So we're currently on the main branch. So to get out of the main branch, we can quit this obviously. And to create a new branch, we'll call it git, I think it's git branch b dev. Oops, not that. Git checkout -b, and we'll call this the dev branch. There'll be many other names like issue, for example, and things like that. So now I've created the dev branch, which is different to the main branch. That means if I write some code here, so if I readme this, readme md, and let's add some, like a paragraph to here. Excellent. So I've created this little paragraph here, and let's say I want to go back to the main branch. So I can exit out of here, and what I can do is I can add these changes to this branch. So if I go git add and git commit feat, adding information about initialization. I probably spelled it wrong, but that's fine, and we'll push those changes there. And you've also got to set up the upstream for this. This will be origin, which would be that repository on GitHub, and dev will be the branch. So if I do this, git push. I can also do origin dev if I want to, which I usually do sometimes. I don't actually set up the upstream usually. And let's go to the code now. So if I go back to, if I go readme here, you'll see that we've got this big paragraph here. I'll just set line wrap. Cool. We'll see that we've got this little paragraph here that's been added to the under the initialization heading. This is markdown, by the way, if interested. So if I get out of this, if I do git checkout main, I want to go back to the main branch. If I go to the same readme file, you see that down there, it's missing that paragraph. And that's because we're on the main branch, and the development branch has those changes. And I can show you that online as well. So if we bring this across here, and if it will show you that I've got this dev branch that's been pushed less than a minute ago. And if we go to here, we can actually select that branch. If I just refresh it, you'll see that here, the README, which this part here looks at the README of your project. You'll see that there, this doesn't have that extra paragraph here. If I just do a refresh, I should be able to have access to the dev branch. You can see that if I scroll down, it has that extra paragraph there. So this is really useful if you want to work on one particular thing and you don't want to put it into your main branch. Your main branch will be what we call production. That's what gets used in your end users. And then let's say dev here could be an example of a feature which you don't want to include in the development branch, in the main branch just yet. You're working on it. And then once you're done, you can merge it into the main branch, which I can show you now. You can merge it into the main branch. And once it's merged into the main branch, then you can, it'll be sent off for production. So let's do that right now. We can do this compare pull request. So what we can do is, in fact, what we usually do is we usually create an issue. So let's say we create an issue. Actually, yeah, we'll create an issue. So for example, we need more information in the initialization paragraph as an example. You can submit this issue. And what we can do is, it's a bit confusing with the UI that's all been set up. So we can assign it to myself. Usually this is the workflow that we have. We assign it to myself. And you have the option of adding a branch here. So what we can do is we can link it to a branch. I think this usually doesn't really work that well. So dev there, we can apply that. So now this applies to the dev branch. And what I can do is, if I go back to pull request, well, it's telling me, because I just pushed this dev branch, I can create a pull request. So a pull request is basically if you want to you're working on your branch and you want to commit that code to the main source, that main branch. So let's do a compare pull request. And what we can do now is, I can just say, I want to, this completes one. That there. So we create the pull request. And generally, because I'm working on it myself, you have someone else who looks over that code for you. We do essentially a code review, so we can go to files changed, and we can check that this is being changed on the main branch. So go back to pull request. And if you have a conversation, etc. Oops, go back to here. And you'll merge that pull request. There's more options here. We can squash, basically, if you have lots of commits here, like I was talking about before, it'll squash those into one commit and then add it to the main branch, or we can rebase, which will just get rid of those commits completely. So what we'll do is we'll just do commit like this, and we'll close the pull request. Why is that? Allow us to merge? Yeah. Actually, so we'll merge that. Sorry, we're not going to do that. We're going to do, so this is quite common, like closing it without merging it. So we want to merge this pull request, and we're going to confirm the merge. And we can actually delete the branch if we want to, so let's do that. It saves you having multiple branches. Let's go back to our code here. And you'll see that now we've got this paragraph added and we're on the main branch. But if we go back to our remote code, let's go to our local code. So if I clear all this, and if I look at the README, You see that here, it's still not updated. So we'll update it on the GitHub, but we need to update it on our local code. This is really important because a problem that sometimes some people get into is that they wake up in the morning and they've not actually fetched the changes from the main branch. They're not fetch the changes from the main branch. And when they start working on their code, they'll realize it's out of sync. So this is a really good example. Let's say we want to work on another feature. So we go git checkout -b, and we'll call this dev1. And this has been broken off from the main branch. So you'll see that if we go to here, this is still unchanged. And a way around this, and you can imagine if you start working on it, and let's say I need to work on this initialization, I need to add more stuff for the paragraph, but that's already been done, but you don't know that because you don't have those changes. So what we have to do is we do a git fetch, and what git fetch does, it'll fetch the origin code. So it'll fetch all those changes. And you'll see that it's basically pulled the main branch from origin main. And now what we need to do is we need to merge those changes into this current branch that I'm working on. So if I go git merge origin main, you'll see that it's added all that information, the readme stuff, onto my current branch that I'm working on. So if I go git readme dev1, you'll see that now I have all these changes here, which is really important to do. So get rid of that. And I think if I go to main, it'll say that I'm behind as well. So if I go vim readme, it's not up to date. So you also have to do a merge on your main branch as well. So main. And now everything should be up to date. Alternatively, you can do a git pull, but I prefer to do a git fetch, and the merge is much more, you actually understand what's going on. Git pull does this for you, but it's a bit too magic, so I prefer to do a fetch and then do a merge to origin main. Great, now I just want to finish up on showing you what gitignore does. So remember our gitignore file, which was this here. You see that I had that private MD. So this is really easy to show. If I do make a thing called private MD, and I say, I want this to be secret. And if I do a LA of that, you'll see that I've got this private MD. Now it's not even being picked up by Git. So if I do a git status, it doesn't even know it's there. It's basically ignored that file. If I do a change to readme here, great. So I've created some more changes there. We can see them here. So if I go git status, you'll see that the readme has been changed. So we can do a git add, git commit. And we'll do a git push. So I pushed on the main branch. You'll see that if we go to the repository here, just refresh it. There's my latest commit message. If you read the code, you'll see that there's no public MD because that's been git ignored here. Private MD has been git ignored. Great, so I hope that helped you out with getting more comfortable with commits. This is pretty much, I'd say, about 90% of my workflow for work and for my personal projects. There are some nuances there, here and there, but I think this will get you started on your journey of using Git, making it a lot easier. I'm hoping it really helped you out. And in terms of that, I really hope you start making your personal projects, sharing them online. This is all I want. I just want more people who are interested to get into code and to be able to share their projects online. It's so much fun being able to do that. The power of GitHub is really good too, because you can set up things like Cloudflare to look at your changes in your code and then produce, so be able to deploy that code almost immediately, which is really handy. You can also work with other people, which is a lot nice as well. This is basically just a really basic guide to get you started. Git has so many features. It's vastly more complicated than I probably made it seem. And there's some stuff I'm still learning every day, some stuff I don't even know. So if I made any mistakes, please let me know in the video, in the comments down below. If you have any questions, please let me know too. And I really hope this helps you out. And as always, if you have anything for me, any criticism or feedback, please get in touch with me on anything, like Twitter, email, comments down below. I read most of the comments. No one really comments on my videos, so I really want to make more content around this sort of stuff. I really want to help people get to this amazing dream of being a programmer, because I've been in this job for 3 months and it's really changed my life in a positive way, and I want this for other people. So anything helps, because I can help other people with it too. And as always, I always say it, stay focused and talk soon.